Picture this. You're scrolling through the Forbes billionaire list. Tech moguls, oil barons, real estate tycoons. But there's one category that never appears on these lists. One business model that has outperformed every stock, every commodity, every investment vehicle in American history. Not for a decade. Not for a generation. For over 150 years. This business thrives during the worst moments in human history. It profits from chaos, it grows stronger during recessions, and it has never, not once, gone out of demand. That business is war. But here's what makes this different from every conspiracy theory you've ever heard. This is unhidden. The contracts are public. The profits are documented. The pattern is undeniable. 5 families, 5 corporate empires, more than 150 years of continuous war profits. Different wars, different technologies, different enemies, but always the same winners. Today, we're going to trace every major American conflict from the Civil War to Afghanistan and show you the pattern that nobody talks about. By the end of this video, you'll never look at defense stocks, foreign policy, or even the evening news the same way again. Let's start with a simple question. What makes the perfect business? Most entrepreneurs would say, recurring revenue, high barriers to entry, inelastic demand, and minimal competition. Now imagine a business that has all of that, plus guaranteed government contracts and immunity from market downturns. That's the defense industry. But it's not just about making weapons. It's about positioning yourself before the conflict even starts. Think about how normal businesses work. You identify a need, develop a product, compete for customers, and hope for profit. But in wartime, all of that reverses. The urgency is extreme. The government can't wait. The competition disappears. And whoever is already positioned wins everything. This creates what economists call a time-compressed monopoly. The government doesn't have time to shop around. They don't have time to negotiate. They pay whatever it takes to whoever can deliver now. And here's the key insight. The companies that profit from war don't start when the war starts. They position themselves decades in advance. They build the infrastructure, they secure the relationships. They make themselves indispensable, so when war breaks out, it's not a risk for them, it's a payday. Wars require 3 things: materials, financing, and logistics. Let's break down each one. First, materials. You need gunpowder, steel, oil, rubber, electronics. These aren't commodities you can just order from Amazon. They require specialized infrastructure that takes years to build, so governments turn to whoever already has that infrastructure. Second, financing. Wars are expensive. The US spent over $2 trillion in Iraq and Afghanistan alone. That money doesn't come from savings accounts. It comes from bonds, and someone has to underwrite those bonds. Third, logistics. Moving millions of tons of equipment across oceans requires ports, ships, fuel networks, and expertise. Again, you can't build that overnight. Now, here's where it gets interesting. In peacetime, these industries compete, but in wartime, they become utilities. The government needs them too badly to let them fail. Risk transfers from the corporation to the taxpayer. This is where cost-plus contracts come in. Instead of bidding a fixed price, contractors charge whatever it costs, plus a guaranteed profit margin. So, delays don't hurt them. Cost overruns don't hurt them. In fact, complications increase their revenue. The government absorbs all the risk. The contractor collects all the reward. And the public foots the bill. This isn't a conspiracy. It's a contract structure. And it has funded some of the wealthiest families in American history. America's first military-industrial dynasty didn't begin with missiles or fighter jets. It began with gunpowder. In 1802, a French chemist named Louis-Irénée du Ponty fled the French Revolution and settled along the Brandywine River in Delaware. He chose that location for 3 reasons: proximity to Philadelphia, where Congress met, isolation from populated areas in case of explosions, and water power for his mills. When the War of 1812 broke out, DuPont was the only American company with the capacity to produce military-grade gunpowder at scale. The government had no choice but to pay whatever DuPont asked. But here's what DuPont understood that others didn't. Wars end, but infrastructure remains. After 1812, they didn't dismantle their mills. They expanded them. By the time of the Mexican-American War in 1846, DuPont was even more dominant. Then came the Civil War. This was DuPont's breakthrough moment. The Union Army needed gunpowder by the ton, and DuPont supplied nearly half of it, producing over 4 million pounds of explosives. Their profits during those 4 years exceeded everything they had made in the previous 6 decades combined. But the most important lesson from DuPont's Civil War profits wasn't the money, it was the model. They proved that positioning before the war was more valuable than innovation during it. By World War I, DuPont had evolved from gunpowder to high explosives. They controlled nearly 40% of Allied explosive production. Between 1914 and 1918, Their profits increased more than 16-fold, not 16%, 16 times. And when the war ended, they did what they always did. They pivoted the infrastructure. Explosives technology became chemical engineering. War profits became peacetime empires. Nylon, Teflon, synthetic rubber. All of it funded by gunpowder. DuPont's pattern was simple. Position early, deliver during crisis, keep the infrastructure, repeat. And it worked for over a century. If DuPont mastered explosives, Rockefeller mastered something even more fundamental: fuel. In the late 1800s, oil was primarily used for lighting. But John D. Rockefeller saw something others didn't. He didn't just extract oil. He controlled every stage: extraction, refining, transportation, and distribution. By the 1890s, Standard Oil controlled 90% of American oil refining. Then the world changed. Navies shifted from coal to oil. Internal combustion engines replaced horses. And suddenly, oil wasn't just valuable, it was strategic. When the U.S. entered the Spanish-American War in 1898, the Navy needed fuel oil, and Rockefeller companies supplied it, not because they were patriotic, because they were positioned. But World War I was where oil became indispensable. Tanks, trucks, aircraft, battleships, submarines, all of them ran on oil, and Rockefeller-controlled companies supplied the Allies with millions of barrels. Here's what most people do want to know: Rockefeller subsidiaries also supplied oil to Germany through neutral countries. It was perfectly legal under international law, and it was devastatingly profitable. By the end of World War I, John D. Rockefeller had become the world's first billionaire. His wealth, adjusted for inflation, exceeded that of Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, and Bill Gates combined at their peaks. World War II followed the same pattern. Standard Oil's successors, ESO and Mobil, supplied the Allies. Congressional investigations revealed patent-sharing agreements with Nazi Germany's I. The deals had delayed American synthetic rubber production, giving Germany an early advantage with charges filed. Were executives in prison? No, because the war effort depended on their oil. They were too important to prosecute. This is the second lesson of war profiteering. Once you become infrastructure, you become immune. The government can't afford to punish you. They need you too badly. DuPont sold explosives. Rockefeller sold fuel. But J.P. Morgan sold something even more fundamental: money itself. When World War I erupted in 1914, the United States declared neutrality. President Wilson insisted America would not take sides. But J.P. Morgan had other ideas. Morgan banks lent billions of dollars to Britain and France, not out of patriotism, but out of profit. Those loans came with a condition. The money had to be spent on American goods, manufactured by American companies, many of which Morgan had financial stakes in. By 1917, American banks had lent the Allies over $2 billion, equivalent to over $50 billion today. If Britain and France lost the war, those loans would never be repaid. American banks would collapse. So when President Wilson asked Congress to declare war in April 1917, it wasn't just about German submarines or democracy. It was about protecting American financial exposure. This is the third lesson. Finance creates commitment. Once enough money is lent, neutrality becomes impossible. The creditor has to protect the investment. After the war, Morgan banks didn't just collect on their loans. They financed German reparations under the Dawes Plan. They refinanced Allied war debts. They underwrote reconstruction bonds. Every transaction generated fees. Morgan didn't care who won. They cared who borrowed, and everyone borrowed. By World War II, aviation had transformed warfare. And one company understood the new rules better than anyone: Lockheed. Lockheed didn't invent the airplane, but they mastered something more valuable: political engineering. They didn't just build weapons. They built political dependencies. Here's how it worked. Lockheed spread their manufacturing across dozens of congressional districts: a factory in Georgia, assembly plants in California, component suppliers in Texas. Each location created jobs, and each job created a constituency. When Congress debated cutting a Lockheed program, representatives didn't just see a weapons system. They saw jobs in their districts. Canceling a contract meant unemployment, which meant losing the next election. Lockheed also pioneered another tactic: hiring retired generals and admirals. These weren't symbolic positions. They were lobbyists with security clearances, personal relationships, and insider knowledge. The revolving door became standard. Military officers approved contracts, then retired into executive positions at the same companies they had overseen. It wasn't illegal, it was networking. But Lockheed's greatest innovation was the cost-plus contract at scale. Programs like the C-5 Galaxy and the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter ran billions over budget and years behind schedule. But they were never cancelled. They were too big to fail. The F-35 program is projected to cost over $1.7 trillion over its lifetime. That's more than the entire GDP of Canada, and it's still not fully operational. But here's the key. Every delay, every complication, every cost overrun increased Lockheed's revenue. Under costs-plus contracts, inefficiency is profitable. Weapons destroy, someone has to rebuild, and that's where Halliburton comes in. Halliburton's specialty was logistics, building bases, paving roads, delivering fuel, feeding troops. It's not glamorous work, but it's essential, and it's enormously profitable. During the Vietnam War, Halliburton's subsidiary Brown and Root built infrastructure across Southeast Asia, airfields, ports, military bases. They operated under cost-plus contracts, which meant the more they spent, the more they earned. But Halliburton's real breakthrough came during the Iraq War. In 2003, Dick Cheney, who had served as Halliburton's CEO, was vice president. Within weeks of the invasion, Halliburton's subsidiary KBR received a no-bid contract worth billions. Audits later revealed massive wastes, overcharges for fuel, meals billed but never served, facilities built and abandoned. One Pentagon audit found $2.7 billion in questionable costs. Was anyone prosecuted? Were contracts revoked? No, because Halliburton was embedded. They ran the fuel supply, they operated the bases, they fed the troops. Canceling their contract would have disrupted operations. This is the fourth lesson. Once you control logistics, you control continuation. The government can't stop the war without stopping your contract. And they can't stop your contract without stopping the war. Let's zoom out. What do these 5 dynasties have in common? First, they positioned before the war. DuPont built mills decades before conflicts. Rockefeller controlled oil before navies needed it. Morgan established relationships before loans were required. Second, they secured monopolies or near monopolies. When war came, the government had no alternatives. Urgency eliminated competition. Third, they transferred risk to the public. Cost-plus contracts meant taxpayers absorbed overruns. Government guarantees meant failures were bailed out. Fourth, they lobbied for continuation. Through campaign contributions, revolving door employment, and geographic job distribution, they made themselves politically untouchable. Fifth, they diversified war profits into peacetime wealth. DuPont's explosives became chemicals. Rockefeller's fuel became foundations. Morgan's loans became universities. The names change, the technologies evolve, but the pattern remains identical across 150 years. Every dollar paid to a defense contractor comes from taxpayers, not from a separate budget, from the same pool that funds schools, roads, healthcare, and everything else. The opportunity cost is staggering. The $2 trillion spent in Iraq and Afghanistan could have rebuilt every bridge in America, provided free community college for a generation, or funded cancer research for decades. But more than money, wars defer futures. Infrastructure projects delayed, scientific research underfunded, education systems neglected. Not because the money doesn't exist, but because it's already committed, and every deficit becomes debt, which means future taxpayers, people not yet born, will spend their lives paying for wars they never voted for. Investigations happen, audits are conducted, fines are occasionally paid, but nothing fundamentally changes. Why? Because these companies are classified as critical infrastructure. They're too embedded to dismantle, too connected to regulate, too necessary to prosecute. When Boeing's 737 MAX crashes killed hundreds, the company wasn't shut down, it was bailed out. When Lockheed's F-35 ran a decade behind schedule, the program wasn't cancelled, it was expanded. This isn't conspiracy, it's structural dependency. The system can't stop itself because too many jobs, too many contractors, too many congressional districts depend on its continuation. This video isn't about whether wars were justified. Some were. It's about what happened after justification was granted. It's about how war stopped being a necessary evil and became a financial asset. How urgency became monopoly. How public service became private profit. The question isn't whether this will continue. History suggests it will. The infrastructure is built. The relationships are established. The incentives are aligned. The real question is whether enough people will recognize the pattern before the next conflict makes it richer again. Because these 5 dynasties didn't build their empires through innovation or risk. They built them through positioning, patience, and political leverage. They understood something most businesses don't. The greatest profits don't come from creating value. They come from being indispensable when urgency strikes. And war, more than any other human activity, creates urgency. If you found this video valuable, hit the like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden economics of American history. Drop a comment below. What pattern from this video surprised you most? And check out the links in the description for source documents and further reading. Thanks for watching.